Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Horror Mine, and also welcome to the first annual HHM Halloween Horror Mine, the first special Halloween season of the Scare Score. I've been doing the Scare Score for almost 3 years now, and this is the first year I get to do something special for Halloween, and I'm super excited about that. In this episode, I'll be going over the 2023 Argentinian horror film, When Evil Lurks. I'll be going over the events that take place throughout the film, while rating the scares on how scary they are or attempt to be. When Evil Lurks is a haunting, dark, and depressing film throughout its entire runtime. But how scary is it? Sit back and relax and join me as we explore When Evil Lurks and tally up the Scare Score. Our movie begins at night with several gunshots going off in the distance. We meet our main characters' brothers Pedro and Jaime Yazurlo. The shots came from a revolver and the brothers seem very concerned. The film's title appears on screen with a very melancholy guitar tune that perfectly sets the haunting tone felt throughout the film. The brothers go to the land of a man named Ruiz to investigate last night's gunshots and stumble upon a gruesome sight. They find the lower half of an unknown man's body and part of his hand on a log. Jaime thinks it may have been a puma, but Pedro says the cuts are too sharp. Next to the body is a briefcase full of odd gold trinkets that look like they'll summon Yami Yugi if you put them together. Whoa! Watch out, Toei. I just mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh! They look through the man's journal and learn he was looking for a woman named Maria Elena who lives nearby. They go to her house and Maria Elena says the man was on his way to kill her son Uriel. Uriel is in the process of turning into a Left 4 Dead boomer and looks absolutely repulsive. His younger brother Eduardo says Uriel is possessed and has been rotting for a long time. Maria Elena says that she prayed for him to get better and Pedro shouts at her that the churches are dead. They live on Ruiz's land and try to keep things quiet so they wouldn't get kicked out. They reported Uriel's condition to the police over a year ago, but nothing's been done. Uriel's condition isn't exactly a feast for the eyes, but not necessarily scary. However, we'll come to find out that what's happening to him is extremely dark and sinister. The brothers go to the local police to report Uriel's condition. They don't believe that Uriel is possessed and refuse to do anything. The body of the man they found was a cleaner who was responsible for properly disposing of the possessed Uriel. It's not that the police don't believe in possessions, but they don't believe that it's happening in their small town. It's also possible that they are too afraid to deal with it and the dark consequences that may follow if they do. They meet with Ruiz and tell him what they saw. While having dinner with his pregnant wife Jimena, Ruiz decides to handle the issue himself and goes to the house armed with a shotgun. He kicks in the door like he has no warrant and no time to waste. Ruiz is absolutely terrified by the sight of Uriel and the pure evil on his land. Maria Elena begs him not to dispatch Ruiz because it will make everything worse and consume their souls. She says it must be done by a cleaner. Possessed Uriel taunts Ruiz to end him before he moves into Jimena's belly and possesses their baby. Eduardo looks over at a revolver, but Ruiz doesn't go through with it and goes back into his truck. The next day, the brothers arrive and say that they should all leave. Ruiz says they must take Uriel as far away from the land as possible. They drag Uriel out using the bed sheets, and for a second, I thought he was going to burst open like that well walker from The Walking Dead. The moment is completely chaotic, but they manage to get Uriel on the back of Ruiz's truck. They drive him away as far as possible, and Ruiz takes his eyes off the road, narrowly missing a kid. They decide to ditch Uriel in a small creek, but realize that his body fell out of the truck when Ruiz swerved earlier. Ruiz thinks Uriel fell off far enough away from their land and calls it a day. Jaime sees a bullet in the cab and also saw several bullets in Uriel's bed earlier. He takes the bullet with him and seems to be puzzled by it. Pedro opens his window to smoke and finds it closed again when he looks up. Jaime takes a closer look at the odd golden equipment from the briefcase and appears very confused with everything that's been happening. During dinner, Ruiz appears shaken by the events that just took place. Jimena calls out to him terrified and points at a single goat among the herd. Ruiz fires his shotgun in the air, scaring away all the goats but one. The goat simply stands there staring at him and seems to change appearances several times. He tells the evil beast to leave and Jimena begs him not to shoot it with a firearm because it will condemn them. The evil goat taunts Ruiz and walks right up to the barrel of the gun. Ruiz turns its head into goat stew and in a pretty shocking moment, Jimena becomes possessed by the evil and takes the axe to his face. She then axes her own face in a very brutal scene. This was a very dark and twisted scene that shows just how fast the evil is spreading. The sudden and unexpected brutality is what makes this scene so effective. This scene is also filled with dread, much like the rest of the film. This explains the urgency in the brothers and Ruiz to get rid of Uriel. However, driving him away seems to have made things much worse. The brothers are sitting quietly in their house and Jaime sees an eerie shadow above his fireplace. They hear a knock on the door from Eduardo, who tells them that Ruiz and his wife are dead. He says his mother disappeared and that taking Uriel away was the wrong thing to do. Jaime wants him to leave, but Pedro lets him stay in the saddle room. They take his revolver and tell him to leave at dawn and never come back. Before he leaves, he tells them not to use electric lights. They decide to leave everything behind and get as far away from this land and the evil as possible. Pedro heads to his ex-wife Sabrina's house to pick up his kids. Her new husband Leonardo answers the door and Pedro tries telling him what's going on. He gets completely naked and asks for a change of clothes. Sabrina yells at him to leave and the dog starts to sniff his clothes. They give him some new clothes for the sake of public decency and he burns his old ones. We meet his young son Santino and learn that Sabrina has a restraining order against him. He tells her that he saw a possessed one, and although she doesn't believe him, it seems to be something people are terrified of. He says they must all leave before the town descends into hell. We are introduced to Sabrina and Leonardo's daughter Vicky before her face is introduced to her dog's teeth. As the adults argue, the dog is now possessed via Pedro's clothes and viciously attacks Vicky. Santino tells the adults what just happened and total chaos ensues. The dog runs out of the house with Vicky and Leonardo goes chasing after it. While Sabrina is freaking out, Pedro goes back for Santino and his autistic son Jair. Leo comes back for a gun and Pedro warns him not to shoot the dog as using guns only works to spread the evil. Pedro flags down the police who are casually driving around town without a side mirror. He hears a gunshot in the distance and sees that Leo didn't listen to him. Realizing that things are about to get much worse, he rushes back to the house and sees Sabrina embracing Vicky. Vicky appears totally fine, but Pedro knows that that isn't Vicky. He asks Jair where the car keys are by promising him apple-flavored ice cream. Vicky then eerily whispers in her mom's ear that dad is going to kill her when he comes home. As Pedro drives away with his sons, a possessed Leo drives the car right into Sabrina. The possessed Vicky happily jumps around at all the chaos happening around her. This was a very intense scene that felt more thrilling than scary. I just knew something terrible was gonna happen when the dog started sniffing his clothes. Pedro meets back up with Jaime at their mother's house and they drive away. Their mom doesn't believe they saw a possessed one and thinks that those only happen in the cities. She describes a possessed one as something bad that goes into a person and uses their body to be born. There are 7 rules to remember when dealing with a possessed one. Don't use electric lights, stay away from animals, don't take anything that was close to them, don't hurt them, don't shoot them with firearms, and don't name the evil by its name. Pedro stops her before she can name the 7th rule. She then gets a call from Sabrina, which Pedro knows should be impossible because she's dead. He answers the phone and Sabrina sounds very sinister.
Quiero que me lo traigas de regreso.
She says the kids don't love him and that she cheated on him because he's a nobody. She then eerily says she knows where he is and she is coming for the children. Sabrina's tone is very creepy and knowing she's dead makes the context of the phone call scarier. He tells Jaime what happened to Sabrina and feels guilty for taking the evil to her. He thinks they should have left as soon as they knew about possessed Uriel. Pedro completely breaks down and Jaime manages to calm him down. He knows someone who lives halfway to the city that can help and lend them some money. They go to the house of a woman named Mirta who thinks that Jair is rotten and possessed. She questions Jaime about the possessed they saw, but he himself isn't sure if Uriel was possessed. Jair refuses to sleep or get out of the car and is being cared for by his grandma. Pedro and Jaime talk about Mirta and we learn she and Jaime used to be intimate. Pedro sleeps in the car with Jair and sees a picture he drew of 5 stick figures. The figures have red heads and the one in the middle is completely red. Everyone falls asleep but Jair and a creepy woman approaches the window. Mirta is also awake and senses the evil presence. The possessed Sabrina arrives and takes Santino. The grandmother just took her sleeping pills and doesn't realize what's happening. Sabrina looks terrifying as her face reflects the injury of getting hit by the car. She also makes a strange noise before saying that she came for her children.
Vine a buscar a mis hijos.
Her voice sounds chilling and really got under my skin. The grandma tells the brothers about Sabrina and Pedro goes into the bedroom. The shot of Sabrina holding Santino as he enters the room is just haunting. She says she's taking the children to a place no one can harm them and jumps out of the window. This film has been extremely dark and unsettling so far, but nothing has truly scared me until this scene. There's just something about the way possessed Sabrina is presented that felt really unnerving. The best way I can describe it is it felt like I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to be there. It just felt wrong, which made it that much more terrifying. Pedro goes to check on Jair and finds the car covered in blood. Jair seems fine, but Mirta is convinced that there is a demon inside him. She tells Jaime to get Pedro and bring him back inside. Mirta pulls out a box of special tools, revealing she used to be a cleaner. This is why Jaime felt like he's seen the equipment before. She says that the 7th rule when dealing with the rotten is to not be afraid of dying. Pedro was afraid Sabrina would come and take the kids, which led her here. She says they must find the original rotten Uriel and get rid of him before the evil within him is born. She scolds them for moving Uriel out of town knowing he was possessed. Mario and Luigi are looking pretty foolish right now. The lights in town are all off and the protocol has been activated, meaning that the evil's influence has probably affected the entire town. Jaime goes looking for Santino while Pedro and Mirta go looking for Uriel. Mirta tells a story of the time she and her husband led a fraudulent church. She said a possessed came into the church and puked out his whole family that he consumed the previous night. Soon after the possessed came, people stopped believing in God and churches started dying. She and her husband then became cleaners, responsible for getting rid of the possessed before the evil inside them could be born. One day, her husband never came back from a cleaning and she moved as far away from the evil as she could. This story adds more context and a darker layer to everything we've seen so far. This is what Pedro meant earlier when he said that churches are dead. This evil spreading through possession sort of makes this feel like the beginning of an epidemic that is getting out of control. Jaime finally finds Sabrina walking down a dark road and what we see next is shocking and brutal. He slowly drives past her and sees Sabrina eating right out of Santino's head. He stops the car for some reason and she doesn't seem to notice him as she continues feasting on her own son. Jaime then decides to floor it and smashes her into a tree. This doesn't happen often when I watch horror films, but this scene made my jaw drop at its sheer brutality. I knew little Santina was never going to grow up, but I didn't expect it to be this gruesome. The presentation also helps make this as shocking as it is. When I initially saw Sabrina walking in the dark, I was not prepared for what I was about to witness. The music also helps make the shocking moment extremely intense. This is an excellent and shocking scare scene that doesn't hold anything back. Pedro and Mirta arrive in the area where Uriel fell and she believes he was taken to a nearby school. She says that evil likes children and that children like evil. As they drive towards the school, we see the blanket that he was wrapped in. Jaime wakes up from the crash and possessed Sabrina still isn't dead but is more mangled than ever. She looks at him and says that she thought he loved her. Poor grandma is at home with Jair, who walks into the house seemingly a completely different person. He asks her for something to eat, revealing that he is indeed possessed by a demon. The terrified look on her face says it all. They arrive at the school and see several students sitting in a dark classroom. They walk inside and Mirta walks past paper cutouts very similar to Jair's drawing. She asks one of the girls where Uriel is, but the girl shakes her head no to each question. Hold on, let me try. Where are Uriel and my dad?
Where are they? Where are they?
She ain't spilling the beans because the girl behind her is there to make sure she doesn't snitch. Their hands and feet are covered in a white powdery substance, either flour or cocaine, and their handprints could be seen on the stage curtain earlier. Mirta runs out of the school coughing and says she could smell something on the children's breaths. Most likely the scent of evil, as all the children are possessed and won't help them. She believes that the children are protecting Uriel by hiding him. A kid pushing a bike shows up and Pedro asks him where Uriel is. I haven't touched on it yet, but Pedro is a pretty annoying character. He isn't necessarily bad, but always seems to make everything worse, especially during this scene where it seems like he isn't listening to what the subject matter expert is telling him whatsoever, and it's frustrating to watch.
¿Tiene otra idea? ¿Hay alguna buena idea acá?
Daddy, chill. The kid comes back out and says Uriel is at Cortez's house, but Mirta thinks it's a trap. Then the little girl comes out and says that Uriel is actually at her house. Mirta believes that the evil children are trying to direct them away from the school where Uriel is actually hiding. Pedro starts dismantling the stage and finds the dead bodies of the adults killed by the children. The kids suddenly appear directly behind them looking like they got beef. She tells Pedro to get her equipment and specifically says not to run. So what does he do? Starts to Usain Bolt his way out, which just made me roll my eyes. Sensing that they're getting close, the little girl continues to try and trick them. Mirta puts her equipment together while Pedro looks for Uriel under the stage. He removes several dead bodies until he finally finds him. He needs to get Uriel out so she can use the device on him, but the only way is to dismantle the entire stage completely. Uriel tries provoking Pedro and does so pretty successfully. The little girl then says there is a fireman's axe in the director's office, but Mirta tells him that she's lying. Pedro succumbs to the evil peer pressure and goes to the office against the orders of the subject matter expert. Surprise, surprise, the axe isn't there and they lock him inside. The kids attack Mirta and destroy her equipment. They take a hammer to Mirta's head and drag her body away. Don't feel bad now, Pedro. That was your fault. Uriel sticks his head out and successfully provokes Pedro into smashing his head in. This is exactly what Uriel wanted to happen, and the evil is finally born. A boy covered in blood crawls out of Uriel's body as Pedro simply looks on, completely defeated. The evil touches and marks Pedro's forehead and simply walks out with the rest of the kids. He walks out into the sunset, the exact moment that was depicted on Jair's drawing and on the classroom window. This was a pretty tense and dreadful climactic scene. Nothing scary really happens though, and I feel that most of the film's tension and suspense faded when the two brothers separated. Also, Pedro's terrible decision making makes it so frustrating to watch. Pedro returns to Mirta's house and embraces Jaime. We also see what appears to be the same goat confronted by Ruiz earlier. You can't kill the goat. Pedro takes a shower, but the bloody handprint on his forehead is still there. Jaime goes to the stable room and speaks to Eduardo, who has been chilling there the entire time. He reveals that a voice in his head told him to kill the cleaner from the beginning, which started the events of the entire film, showing that the evil growing inside Uriel's body has been protected from the very beginning. Jaime asks what happened to his mom and he replies, the same thing that happened to yo mama. We learn poor grandma's dark fate as Jair starts to cough out blood and hair while trying to down the apple ice cream he's been asking for the entire film. Her jewelry falls out of his mouth and Pedro puts two and two together. In the film's final scene, Pedro walks out of the house and falls to his knees, completely defeated. He wails in total anguish as Jaime appears confused, but also just as defeated as the movie ends. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was When Evil Lurks. My friends, the best way I can describe this film is dark and bleak for the entire runtime. There is a strong sense of dread from the very beginning that doesn't let up until the end credits start rolling. It also feels like a disturbing thrill ride the entire time. There are a lot of very gruesome and brutal sights that director Damien Rugna wasn't afraid to show. The presentation of these brutal set pieces also helps make them very effective. With all that said, aside from the constant feeling of dread and scenes of sheer brutality, the film as a whole isn't necessarily scary. Those who are squeamish may find this hard to watch, but this isn't the type of film that'll give me nightmares or have me running to and from the restroom at nighttime. There are a few creepy scenes here and there, but scary isn't a word I would use to describe the overall film, earning When Evil Lurks an okay scare score of 45%. The audience scare score voted on by channel members is 72%. And I can definitely see why people would be terrified by this film, but unfortunately for me, it just wasn't that scary. Despite not being overly scary, this is still a great horror film that I highly recommend, and a superb watch during the Halloween season. The scariest scene in the film is when Sabrina returns for her children. It is the most straightforward scare scene of the entire film and gave me chills. The way Sabrina looks is horrifying, but the way she sounds is what makes her so scary. Her presence just feels so wrong and unsettling. It's an excellent scare that leads to one of the more brutal scenes I've seen in a long time. I want to give a big shout out to our newest Golden Kayako members of the channel. Thank you to Miyu Takahashi, Janae, Megan, Lana, and Arikins. And thank you to all our Golden Kayako members and everyone else supporting the channel through channel memberships. But as always, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you all for tuning in, and I cannot wait to see y'all right back here in the horror mine. Y'all stick around.